My name is Miriam Caldwell, and I am 68 years old. 2 days after my husband's memorial service, my daughter-in-law stood beside the guest book in our church hall, touched my arm like she was comforting me, and said something I will remember for the rest of my life. "We already know what has to happen with the yard." She said it softly, with that careful voice people use when they think kindness will hide control. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. Then I looked at her face. And I said, "Then it is a good thing Thomas knew too." Her fingers left my arm. For the first time that week, Vanessa did not have an answer ready. She had been counting on grief to make me quiet. She had been counting on my age to make me weak. She had been counting on everyone in Port Mason believing what they had believed for almost 40 years, that Caldwell Marine Yard had always belonged to my husband because his name was painted on the sign. But Thomas had known exactly what they believed. He had also known what they were waiting for. And 6 weeks before he died, while everyone thought he was too tired to notice anything, he walked into a lawyer's office on Harbor Street and left behind a blue folder that would change everything. But before that folder can matter, I have to tell you about the yard. Because the yard was not only a business, it was our life. Caldwell Marine Yard sat at the far end of Port Mason, Maine, where the harbor narrowed and the old fishing boats came in before dawn. We repaired wooden hulls, restored small sailboats, replaced engines, and built custom docks for people who wanted everything to look old but work like it was brand new. 31 people worked there. Some had been with us so long that their children had grown up running between the tool sheds. On paper it was a repair yard. In town it was simply called Tom's Place. People would say, "Take it to Tom. Tom will know what to do." Tom built half the docks on this coast. And Thomas did build beautiful things. He could run his hand over cracked cedar and know if it could be saved. He could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and hear what other men missed after an hour. He had patience for wood, boats, and weather. He had much less patience for paperwork. That was where I came in. I handled the accounts, permits, insurance, payroll, supplier contracts, leases, tax filings, customer disputes, bank meetings, and every letter that arrived with fine print at the bottom. I knew where every dollar came from and where it went. I knew which customer would complain, which supplier would lie, and which bank officer would smile while trying to raise our rate. Thomas was the hands. I was the structure. And for 38 years I let people call it his yard because it kept life easier. I never corrected the fisherman at the counter. I never corrected the bank when they greeted Thomas first. I never corrected my own son when he called it Dad's business, even though he had walked past the real answer almost every day of his adult life. There was a bronze sign beside the front office door. It had been there since 1986. Caldwell Marine Yard. M. and T. Caldwell. Founded 1986. M before T. I chose that order myself. Nobody ever asked why. Not once. My son Nathan certainly did not. Nathan was 42, and he had worked at the yard since he was 19. He was Thomas's son from his first marriage, but I raised him from the time he was 6 years old. I packed his lunches. I sat through school meetings. I taught him how to balance a checkbook, though I cannot say that lesson stayed with him. I loved him like he was mine. That is the truth. It is also true that love does not stop a person from disappointing you. Nathan grew up thinking the yard would fall into his hands one day like rain from the sky. He never asked how it was owned. He never asked what debt had been paid, what risks had been taken, or whose signature had saved it when the banks nearly shut us down in 1993. He only knew that his father's name was Tom Caldwell. To him that was enough. Then he married Vanessa. Vanessa was 37, beautiful in a sharp, polished way. With dark hair she always kept smooth and a smile that arrived 1 second before her words did. She had grown up with very little money, and I do not say that as an insult. I knew what poverty can do to a person. It can make safety feel like something you have to grab before someone else grabs it first. For the first few years I tried to understand her. I really did. She had 2 children with Nathan, Lily and Graham, and she talked about their future constantly. College funds, houses, security, legacy. She used those words the way other people use prayer. Then, about a year before Thomas died, she started saying something new. At Sunday dinners, she would smile across the table and say, "Miriam, you and Tom have worked so hard. Maybe it's time to let Nathan start leading." Or, "You deserve to rest. Nobody expects you to keep doing all those books forever." It sounded caring if you did not listen closely, but I had spent my whole life listening closely. What she really meant was that I should move aside before anyone had to push me. Thomas noticed before I admitted I had. He was 71 by then, still broad in the shoulders, still stubborn enough to climb under a boat when every doctor in town had told him to stop. But that summer he began losing weight. He blamed the heat at first. Then he blamed his back. Then he blamed age. In September, the doctor used the words congestive heart failure and advanced. Thomas thanked him like the man had only given him a weather report. On the drive home I asked, "How much time?" He kept both hands on the wheel. "Enough if I use it right." That was Thomas. He did not ask why. He asked what needed doing. I thought he meant the ordinary things. Funeral arrangements. The house. The insurance policy. The passwords he always forgot. I thought he was preparing me for being alone. I did not know he was preparing me for being attacked. That same week, he started going into town by himself. He would drive the old green pickup to Harbor Street and come back with nothing in his hands but a look on his face that I could not read. Once, I saw a blue folder tucked under his arm as he crossed the yard from the office to his private workshop. I asked him, "What is that?" He kissed the top of my head and said, "Something I should have done years ago." I laughed because I thought he meant updating the insurance forms. He did not laugh with me. A few nights later, we were sitting at the kitchen table while the rain hit the windows. He had a yellow notepad in front of him. When I walked behind his chair, he covered the page with his hand. I said, "Since when do you hide paperwork from me?" He said, "Since it became a gift." I told him I did not like mysterious gifts. He said, "You will like this one when you need it." Then he tore the page off, folded it, and slipped it into the pocket of his flannel shirt. I should have asked more questions. But when someone you love is dying, you do not spend every moment investigating them. Sometimes you let them keep whatever dignity they are building for themselves. So I let him have his secrets. By October, Thomas could no longer climb the stairs without stopping halfway. He still tried to go to the yard every morning, even when I begged him not to. He would sit in the office chair, looking out through the glass at the boats in the yard, and the men would pretend not to notice how thin he had become. That was when Vanessa became helpful. I used that word carefully. She brought casseroles. She organized visitors. She answered the house phone before I reached it. She told people Thomas needed rest. She created a calendar on the refrigerator and began writing names, and times like our home had become a waiting room. First I was grateful. Then I noticed she was not only managing visitors. She was managing access. If I was with Thomas too long, she would come to the bedroom door and say, "Miriam, you need to eat." If Nathan wanted to speak to his father alone, she would make sure it happened. If Thomas asked for me while she was in the room, she would say, "She's resting. You don't want to worry her." I heard that sentence once from the hallway. I stood there with a folded towel in my hands and felt something cold move through me. I almost walked in. Then I looked at Thomas asleep against the pillows, pale and exhausted, and I made a choice that I have replayed many times since. I did not turn his final weeks into a war. I stepped back more than I should have. That is the truth too. Grief can make a person noble, but it can also make a person slow. And while I was trying to protect Thomas from conflict, Vanessa was bringing papers into my bedroom and asking a dying man to sign away things she did not understand. Thomas died on a Monday morning in November, just before sunrise. I was holding his hand when it happened. There are no words that make that moment smaller. He was breathing. Then he was not. And the house seemed to change shape around me. For a few hours everyone was kind. By evening, Vanessa had already begun talking about practical matters. She said that was what Thomas would have wanted. Nathan stood beside her, silent and pale, nodding whenever she looked at him. The memorial was planned for Thursday. The lawyer's office called the next day and said there would be a formal reading the following Monday morning. Vanessa heard me repeat that on the phone. Her face changed for less than a second. Then she smiled. "Of course," she said. "We all want things handled properly." That was when I knew she was afraid of something. Not enough to stop. Only enough to hurry. At the memorial, the church hall smelled of coffee, damp coats, and lilies someone had ordered without asking me. People touched my hands and told me Thomas had been a good man. They told me the yard would never be the same. They told me Nathan would carry it forward. I nodded because that is what widows are expected to do. Then Vanessa came to stand beside me near the guest book. She looked around to make sure people could see us but not hear us. She touched my sleeve, and she said, "We already know what has to happen with the yard." I looked at her. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt him beside me, not as a ghost, but as a man who had taken measurements before cutting the wood. I said, "Then it is a good thing Thomas knew too." Vanessa's smile froze. "What does that mean?" I looked across the room at Nathan, who would not meet my eyes. Then I looked back at her. "It means Monday will be important." I walked away before she could ask anything else. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her. I did not need to. A person who has built her whole plan in secret does not fear shouting nearly as much as she fears a locked drawer opening at the wrong time. And somewhere in Harbor Street, inside a blue folder I had never been allowed to read, Thomas had left the key. The day after the memorial, Vanessa arrived at my house with Nathan and her older brother Marcus. That was the first thing that told me this was not a family visit. Marcus had no reason to be there. He was not close to Thomas. He had come to family dinners maybe 4 times in 10 years, and every time he mostly talked about real estate, tax breaks, and how sentimental people were always the easiest to beat in business. He owned a small construction company called Bayline Developments. Or at least he liked to say he owned it. By that winter, half the town knew Bayline was behind on payments, but people in small towns are polite enough not to say the obvious out loud until the sheriff has to say it for them. Vanessa walked into my kitchen like she had already chosen where her furniture would go. Nathan stayed near the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, looking down at the floor. Marcus leaned against the counter without asking, the way men do when they have mistaken confidence for ownership. Vanessa placed a folder on the kitchen table. It was white, not blue, not Thomas's. She said, "We wanted to make sure Monday doesn't become painful." I looked at the folder. Painful for whom? She smiled like the question had been sad instead of sharp. For everyone. For the children. For Nathan. For you. I pulled out the chair and sat down because my knees were tired, and because sitting made them think I had already accepted the meeting. Vanessa opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. At the top, in plain black letters, it said, "Statement of Final Wishes." Under it there were 4 paragraphs. The house was to go to Nathan. The yard was to go to Nathan. All business accounts were to be transferred under Nathan's control. I was to be provided for reasonably, though the paper did not say what reasonably meant or who would decide it. At the bottom was Thomas's signature. It was shaky. I knew that signature better than anyone alive. I knew the way Thomas crossed his T's when he was tired. I knew the way his hand dragged when the arthritis in his thumb hurt. I knew the difference between a man signing carefully and a man being guided through emotion. This was his signature, but it was not his decision. I read the page once. Then I read it again. Not because I needed more time to understand it, because they needed to believe I did. Vanessa sat across from me watching my face. Nathan still had not looked up. Marcus said, "Looks simple enough." I folded my hands on the table. "When did he sign this?" Vanessa answered too quickly. "Late October." Nathan's head moved slightly. It was small but I saw it. I said, "Late October?" Vanessa paused. "Early November, maybe." Everything was happening so fast. Marcus pushed himself off the counter. "The date doesn't really matter. He signed it." I looked at him. The date always matters. The room changed after that. Only a little but enough. Vanessa's smile stayed in place but her eyes hardened. She said, "Miriam, Thomas wanted Nathan to have the yard. Everyone knows that." I looked at my son then. He finally raised his eyes. For 1 second I thought he might speak like himself. I thought he might say this had gone too far, or at least admit that he did not know enough to be so sure. But Vanessa reached for his hand before he could decide who he was going to be. He looked back down. That was answer enough. I slid the paper back toward her. "I'll let the lawyer explain everything on Monday." Vanessa did not touch the folder. Miriam, lawyers make things ugly. Family can handle family. I had heard that sentence before. People usually say it when they want the law kept out of a room where the truth has no protection. I stood up and began collecting the coffee cups I had set out before they arrived. Marcus laughed under his breath. She's playing hardball. I turned toward him with the cups in my hands. No, Marcus. I'm washing dishes. He did not like that. Men like Marcus rarely do well with women who refuse to perform fear for them. Vanessa stood. Her voice softened, and somehow that made it worse. Think about Lily and Graham. They have already lost their grandfather. I don't want them to lose time with their grandmother too. There it was. The grandchildren. I had been waiting for that part. Vanessa knew exactly where she wanted to press. She had watched me bake birthday cakes, sew Halloween costumes, and sit through school plays where Graham forgot every line and smiled anyway. She knew I would give up almost anything before I gave them up. Almost. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, I will see the children whenever their parents allow it. That decision will belong to you. What belongs to Thomas will be handled by the will. Vanessa's face changed. The softness left it. Only for a second. Then she gathered the folder, smoothed the front of her coat, and said, You are making this harder than it has to be. No, I said. I think someone already did that. They left through the back door. Nathan was last. He paused with his hand on the knob and looked back at me. I could see the boy I raised somewhere behind his face. The one who used to bring me broken toys and trust that I could make them work again. He opened his mouth. Then Vanessa called from outside. Nathan. And he went. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour with the house completely quiet around me. I was not calm because I was strong. I was calm because I had gone past panic. There is a place grief takes you where fear cannot find a good handle. That evening, I found the first clue Thomas had left for me. It was in his workshop behind the yard. In the small room with the scarred bench and the radio that only picked up old country music and weather reports. I had avoided that room since he died because it smelled too much like him. Cedar dust, diesel, varnish, coffee. But something made me go there. Maybe it was the way Vanessa had said family can handle family. Maybe it was the way Nathan had looked at the floor. Maybe it was Thomas himself, in whatever way a person can still guide you after they are gone. On the workbench, placed exactly in the center, was a wooden box. It was made of maple and brass, and I knew immediately he had built it by hand. Thomas had a way of hiding beauty in clean corners. The joints were perfect. The lid fit so smoothly it opened without a sound. Inside was a note. Miriam, if you found this before Monday, good. If you found it after, Ruth will still know what to do. Do not argue in the kitchen. Do not answer threats. Do not let them rush you. Bring this box to Ruth before the reading. Trust what we built. I read it 3 times before I understood I was crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough that the ink blurred and I had to wipe my eyes with the sleeve of my cardigan. Under the note was a blue folder. The same color as the one I had seen weeks earlier under his arm. Inside the folder were copies. A letter from a law office. An engagement agreement dated September 29th. A receipt. A typed list in Thomas's square, careful handwriting. And one sentence written on a yellow sticky note. Ask Eleanor about the night they shut the door. Eleanor Pike was Thomas's home nurse. She had been with us the last 3 weeks. A tall woman with silver hair and calm hands. She did not speak unless something needed saying, which made people mistake her for simple. She was not simple. She saw everything. I called her that night. She answered on the second ring. When I said her name, she did not sound surprised. She said, I wondered when you would find what he left. I sat down on Thomas's stool. You knew. I knew enough. What happened the night they shut the door? There was a pause. Then Eleanor said, You should hear it in person. She came over 20 minutes later. She carried no casserole, no flowers, no polite widow gift. She carried a plain notebook with a black cover. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, in the same chair Vanessa had used that morning, and told me what I had not allowed myself to see. It happened 11 days before Thomas died. I had fallen asleep in the guest room because Vanessa insisted I rest. I remembered that night because I had been so tired my hands shook when I tried to pour water. Eleanor said Vanessa and Nathan came into Thomas's room around 10:30. Marcus was with them. That part one did not know. They had a paper. Eleanor asked what it was. Vanessa said it was private family business. Eleanor refused to leave. Then Nathan asked her to step outside because his father wanted a moment with family. Eleanor looked at me when she said that. I knew he didn't ask for it. But your son did. And I could not force my way into a family conversation unless Mr. Caldwell was in immediate medical danger. I asked, "How was Thomas?" Her expression tightened. Medicated. Weak. Drifting in and out. He knew people were there, but he was not following a legal document. I am certain of that. I held the edge of the table. Eleanor continued. She said she stood in the hallway. The door was not fully closed. She heard Vanessa tell Thomas that I was asleep and did not need to be bothered. She heard Thomas ask for me twice. The second time his voice was clearer. He said, "Get Miriam." No one did. Then Eleanor heard Vanessa say, "This is just to make things easier for her." A few minutes later, Nathan came out of the room looking sick. Marcus came out smiling. Vanessa came out holding the paper. Eleanor wrote it all down that night because she had learned, after 30 years of nursing, that people who pressure the dying often try to pretend later that everyone consented. I asked, "Will you say this on Monday?" She looked offended that I had to ask. "I will say it wherever it needs to be said." After she left, I took Thomas's note from the box and placed it on the table beside the blue folder. Do not argue in the kitchen. He knew me well. He knew I would want to explain, to correct, to defend, to point to every document and say, "You fools, you never even looked." But Thomas had always been the better carpenter. He understood that some things only hold if you wait for the glue to set. So I waited. The next morning, I drove to the yard for the first time since his death. The bronze sign beside the office door was green at the edges from years of salt air. M. and T. Caldwell. Founded 1986. I touched the first letter with my glove. M. The whole truth had been there the entire time. Inside the office, our bookkeeper, June Mallory, looked up from her desk and went pale with relief. "Miriam," she said, "I was hoping you'd come in." That was when I learned the second part. Nathan had been in the office twice that week asking for equipment valuations, account balances, and copies of insurance policies. He told June he would be taking over soon and needed to understand what could be used as collateral. Collateral. That word brought me all the way awake. For what? June looked toward the closed door, though nobody else was there. "Marcus has a loan coming due. I don't know the full amount, but I heard him tell Nathan the yard would cover it once the estate cleared." I asked how much. June hesitated. $72,000. I closed my eyes. Then I opened them. $72,000. That was not grief. That was not family. That was a clock. And Vanessa was not trying to inherit the yard someday. She was trying to get control before that debt came due. I walked out of the office and stood in the cold yard among the boats Thomas had loved. For the first time since he died, I did not feel only sorrow. I felt prepared. Not because I knew everything. Because Thomas had known enough. And Monday was coming. On Sunday evening, Vanessa tried one more time. I knew she would. People like Vanessa do not panic all at once. They tighten slowly. First with sweetness, then with pressure, then with threats dressed up as concern. She came alone this time. That told me she believed I was easier to handle without witnesses. I had just finished washing the supper plate. I had not really eaten when I saw her headlights sweep across the kitchen window. For a moment I stood at the sink and watched her car stop in the driveway. Thomas would have said, "Let her knock twice." So I did. The first knock was polite. The second had more of herself in it. I opened the door. Vanessa stood on the porch in a cream coat with her hair pinned back and her handbag held neatly in front of her. She looked like she had dressed for a bank meeting, which in a way she had. She smiled. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. She walked to the kitchen table without being invited and sat down in the chair she always chose. The one facing the doorway. The one that let her see anyone coming before they saw her. I put the kettle on because manners are not weakness. They are simply manners. Vanessa watched me move around my own kitchen. Then she said, I know grief makes everything feel bigger than it is. I took 2 mugs from the cabinet. She continued. I think you're scared. That's understandable. Tom handled the yard for so long. And now everything feels uncertain. I turned toward her. Thomas did not handle the yard alone. Her smile tightened. Of course. I only meant that he was the one people looked to. That much was true. People had looked to Thomas because he was easier to see. He was tall, loud when he laughed, good with men who spoke in tools and engines. I had been the woman behind the counter with invoices, account ledgers, and a phone tucked under my chin. It is strange how invisible a woman can become while keeping everything alive. Vanessa opened her handbag and took out another paper. Not the same one from Saturday. This one was longer. She laid it on the table and smoothed it with both hands. I had Marcus ask someone to draft this. It's just temporary. You sign authority over to Nathan for the business accounts until the estate is settled. Nothing permanent yet. It will keep payroll moving, keep customers calm, keep the bank from getting nervous. She pushed it toward me. I did not touch it. Payroll has never missed a Friday in 38 years. I know, she said quickly. Because you and Tom worked hard. But things change. Do they? Miriam, please don't make this personal. I almost laughed. There are few sentences more personal than someone asking you to sign away control of your life's work at your own kitchen table 2 days after your husband's memorial. Instead, I sat across from her. Where is Nathan? At home with the children. Does he know you are here? She hesitated. That was enough. I said. So this is not Nathan asking. Her eyes hardened again, and this time she did not hide it fast enough. Nathan is overwhelmed. He lost his father. He doesn't need you making everything more difficult, because you're afraid of letting go. There it was. The shape of her real opinion. I was not grieving. I was afraid. I was not protecting what Thomas and I built. I was refusing to let go. I looked down at the paper. There was a blank line at the bottom for my signature. Vanessa had even placed a pen beside it. A nice one. Blue ink. I thought of Thomas's blue folder sitting in the maple box in the next room. Then I thought of his note. Do not argue in the kitchen. I folded my hands. Monday is tomorrow. That is exactly why we should settle this tonight. Nothing will be settled tonight. Her jaw moved once. Then she leaned forward, and her voice dropped into something colder. You know, if this becomes ugly, people will remember who made it ugly. I am sure they will. Nathan has worked there his whole adult life. So have I. It is his father's legacy. It is our work. She stared at me. For the first time, I think she understood that I was not confused. That was what frightened her. Not that I was fighting. That I understood. Vanessa picked up the pen and held it out to me. Miriam, sign it. I looked at the pen, then at her. No. The word was small, but it filled the kitchen. For a few seconds she did not move. Then she put the pen down with careful control. The children are very sensitive right now, she said. They hear things. They ask questions. I would hate for them to feel caught between adults. I stood up and took her untouched tea to the sink. Children should never be used as handles, Vanessa. They break too easily. She rose from the chair so quickly it scraped against the floor. You act like I'm the villain because I'm trying to protect my family. I turned back to her. No. I act like a woman who has read every paper placed in front of her for 40 years. For once she had no answer. She gathered her unsigned paper, placed it back inside her handbag and walked to the door. Before she left, she said, You won't like what happens if you embarrass Nathan tomorrow. I opened the door for her. Then I hope Nathan does not embarrass himself. She left without saying goodbye. When her car disappeared down the road, I locked the door and stood in the hallway with my hand on the latch. I was not brave in that moment. I was tired. There is a difference. Bravery sounds noble when people describe it later. In the moment, it mostly feels like being too exhausted to keep pretending. I slept badly that night, but I did sleep. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. The house was still dark. Thomas's side of the bed was cold, and for a few seconds I forgot he was gone. I turned my head to speak to him, and the silence came back so hard it nearly took my breath. Then I saw the maple box on the chair beside the bed. I had placed it there before sleeping. The sight of it steadied me. I dressed carefully. A plain charcoal dress. Black shoes. Thomas's navy wool coat over my arm because the day looked cold through the window. I pinned my hair back the way I used to for bank meetings, not because I cared how I looked, but because I wanted my hands to have something familiar to do. Before leaving, I walked through the house slowly. The kitchen where Thomas had burned toast every Sunday. The hallway where Nathan's school pictures still hung. The back room where Lily and Graham kept their toys in a basket. Every room seemed to be waiting for me to choose whether it was memory or battlefield. I took the maple box and drove into town. Ruth Bell's office was above the old pharmacy on Harbor Street. Her name was painted in gold letters on the glass door downstairs. Ruth Bell. Attorney at law. Estates, trusts, business law. I had spoken to her only once on the phone, the evening after I found Thomas's box. Her voice had been calm, exact, and older than I expected. She asked if I had the folder. She asked if anyone else had seen it. Then she told me to come 1 hour before the reading. When I reached the top of the stairs, her assistant opened the door before I knocked. "Mrs. Caldwell?" I nodded. "She's expecting you." Ruth Bell was a small woman with white hair cut to her chin and glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a dark green suit and had the posture of a person who had spent 40 years making powerful men repeat themselves under oath. She came around the desk and took both my hands. "I am sorry for your loss," she said. Most people had been saying that all week. But Ruth said it like she understood that loss and paperwork had arrived together, and that one did not wait politely for the other to finish. I handed her the maple box. She opened it, looked at Thomas's note, and smiled sadly. "He told me he was building you something." "He told me nothing." "He said you would be annoyed about that." "I am." "Good," Ruth said. "He said that would help." For the first time in days, I almost smiled. Then she became businesslike. She laid out 3 folders on her desk. 1 blue, 1 gray, 1 red. The blue folder is Thomas's September estate plan. He executed it here while fully competent. 2 witnesses, neither related, neither inheriting. Notarized. Recorded where necessary. She tapped the gray folder. This contains the formation documents for Caldwell Marine Yard, the operating agreement, the amended ownership schedules, and the deed for the land under the yard. Then she tapped the red folder. "This is what Mrs. Caldwell brought to your kitchen." For a second I was confused. Then I realized she meant Vanessa. Mrs. Caldwell. My daughter-in-law had taken the name and seemed to believe it came with everything else. Ruth saw my face. "I know," she said. "There are too many Mrs. Caldwells in this matter. By the end of the morning, everyone will know which one owns what." She opened the blue folder. "Thomas's will places his personal assets into a trust. You are trustee. The house passes into that trust. His minority interest in the yard passes into that trust. You control the trust for your lifetime. Upon your death, there are distributions to the grandchildren, subject to education and age restrictions. Nathan is not disinherited, but he does not receive control." I listened carefully. That was what Thomas had done. He had not punished Nathan entirely. He had protected the children without handing the keys to their parents. Ruth continued. "Now the business. Caldwell Marine Yard is owned 60% by you personally and 40% by Thomas. That has been true since the restructuring in 1998. 60? I asked. I believe it was 55 before the restructuring. I remembered then. The bank crisis. Thomas had wanted to sign whatever they gave him. I refused. I brought in a business attorney from Portland, restructured the debt, and put more of the ownership under my name to protect the yard if Thomas's old tax lien from before our marriage ever resurfaced. I had forgotten the percentage. Not the work. Only the number. Ruth said. "The land is entirely in your name. The docks are under the company. The North Storage Building is under the company. The house is in Thomas's name and passes into the trust. Vanessa's paper cannot touch your 60%, cannot touch the land, and cannot give Nathan control of business accounts." I closed my eyes. Thomas had trusted the paperwork because he had trusted me. Then Ruth opened the red folder. The statement they had Thomas sign in November is legally vulnerable for several reasons. His capacity will be questioned. The witnesses benefit directly. There is evidence of pressure. Nurse Pike's testimony is very important. She is coming? She is already downstairs. I looked toward the door. Ruth continued. Also, and this is crucial, even if that November paper were valid, it could only direct property Thomas owned. It cannot give away your ownership. It cannot give away land titled in your name. It cannot transfer company authority that the operating agreement assigns to you. I sat very still. All weekend, Vanessa had acted like I was standing in the way of Nathan's inheritance. In truth, she had been trying to inherit things Thomas never owned. Ruth reached into the desk drawer and removed a sealed blue envelope. The paper matched the folder. My name was written across the front in Thomas's block handwriting. Miriam. My throat tightened. Ruth placed it on the desk between us. Thomas left a letter. He instructed that it be read aloud only if anyone attempted to use a later informal document or pressure you into surrendering control. I looked at the envelope. And if they don't? Then it remains yours. We both knew they would. Ruth said. He was very clear. He did not want a private warning. He wanted the truth said in front of the people who had participated. That sounds like him. He said he had let you be underestimated for too long. I looked down at my hands. The skin was thinner than it used to be. The veins stood out now. These were old hands, yes, but they had signed payroll checks through storms and recessions. They had carried Nathan when he was sick. They had held Thomas while he left the world. They were not hands that needed Vanessa's pen. Ruth stood. They will be here in 20 minutes. You may sit wherever you like. Thomas would tell me to sit in the back. Ruth's mouth lifted slightly. He did. So I sat in the back. The conference room had 12 chairs, a long table, and windows overlooking Harbor Street. Outside, gulls moved in circles over the roofline. A delivery truck backed up near the pharmacy. The town went on being ordinary because towns do that, even when your life is about to split open in public. Eleanor Pike arrived first and took a chair against the wall. She touched my shoulder as she passed. Then June Mallory came in, our bookkeeper, holding a folder against her chest like a shield. Ruth had asked her to attend because of the business records and Nathan's requests for collateral information. Then came Marcus. He arrived in a gray suit that did not fit quite right, talking loudly on his phone until Ruth's assistant asked him to end the call. He looked annoyed, which told me he was nervous. Miriam Caldwell came next. Thomas's older sister. 74, narrow-eyed, and still angry that Thomas had married me after his first wife left. Marianne had never forgiven me for becoming the woman who stayed. She hugged me stiffly and whispered, "This should be simple if everyone remembers Blood." I said, "Blood has never filed a tax return for me, Marianne." She pulled back like I had slapped her. Then Nathan and Vanessa arrived. Vanessa wore navy again. It was becoming her uniform for victory. Nathan looked as though he had not slept. Behind them came two cousins, a floor supervisor named Luis, and a local accountant who had handled some of the company's outside filings years ago. Vanessa saw me sitting in the back with the maple box on my lap. Her eyes flicked to it, then away. She smiled. "You don't have to sit back there, Miriam. This is family." I said, "I see better from here." Ruth entered last. She closed the door herself. Then she sat at the head of the table and placed the blue envelope in front of her where everyone could see it. Vanessa noticed it immediately. So did Marcus. Nathan looked at the envelope and then at me. For a moment his face changed. I think some part of him remembered his father's handwriting. Ruth folded her hands. "Thank you all for coming. We are here regarding the estate of Thomas Edward Caldwell, and also to address certain questions concerning Caldwell Marine Yard." Before Ruth could continue, Vanessa stood. Of course she did. She reached into her handbag and removed the white folder. "There is something that should be reviewed first," she said. Thomas made his final wishes clear before he passed. This document was signed after whatever older documents may exist. It names Nathan as the person who should take over the yard and the house. She placed it on the table. Then she looked around the room. "I think honoring that will spare this family unnecessary conflict." Marian nodded. Marcus leaned back as if the matter had been settled. Nathan stared at the paper. Ruth looked at the document without touching it. Then she looked at Vanessa. "Please sit down." Vanessa blinked.
I'm sorry.
Please sit down, Mrs. Caldwell. I will address that document in order. The room went quiet. Vanessa sat slowly. Ruth opened the blue folder. We will begin with the will executed by Thomas Caldwell on September 29th of this year in this office, in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and a notary. Vanessa turned her head sharply toward Nathan. Marcus sat forward. Ruth read the date again. Slowly. Then she read the clause revoking prior wills, informal statements, handwritten notes, and any other document claiming to direct Thomas's estate, unless executed with the required legal formalities. Vanessa interrupted. But ours was signed later. Ruth looked over her glasses. It was signed later. That does not make it valid. Marcus muttered something under his breath. Ruth turned to him. Mr. Vale, if you intend to speak, you will do so clearly. If not, remain silent. He looked away. I almost heard Thomas laugh. Ruth lifted the white paper Vanessa had brought. This document was allegedly signed in November, when Mr. Caldwell was under home medical care. It is witnessed by Nathan Caldwell and Vanessa Caldwell, both of whom would benefit directly from its contents. There is also a witness prepared to testify that Mr. Caldwell was medicated, confused, and asking for his wife while this document was presented to him. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. That is not true. Eleanor stood. It is true. Every head turned toward her. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I was there that night. Mr. Caldwell asked for Miriam twice. He was told she was unavailable. She was asleep down the hall. I was asked to leave the room before the paper was signed, and I documented the event immediately afterward. Nathan put his face in his hands. Vanessa whispered, Nathan. He did not look at her. Ruth placed the white paper back on the table. On capacity and undue influence alone, this document is unlikely to survive challenge. But even if we imagined it did, it cannot give away what Thomas Caldwell did not own. That was the sentence. The one Thomas had built the whole room for. Vanessa frowned. What does that mean? Ruth opened the gray folder. It means we are now going to discuss the yard. Ruth opened the gray folder and took out the first document. She placed it in the center of the table, careful and square, like she was setting down something heavier than paper. This is the original operating agreement for Caldwell Marine Yard, she said. Formed in 1986. Amended in 1998. Current ownership is as follows. Vanessa was already shaking her head, though Ruth had not reached the important part yet. Ruth continued. 60% belongs to Miriam Caldwell personally. 40% belonged to Thomas Caldwell, and now passes into the trust under the September will. Miriam Caldwell is the trustee. For a few seconds nobody spoke. The room was so quiet I could hear the old pipes in the wall ticking from the heat. Then Nathan said, That can't be right. His voice sounded young. Not 42. Not a man with a wife, children, and a job. Young. Ruth looked at him without any cruelty. It is right. The documents have been in effect for decades. Nathan stared at the paper as if it might change if he looked long enough. But Dad ran the yard. Your father worked the yard, Ruth said. Your mother structured, financed, and majority owned it. Vanessa leaned forward. That's not how anyone understood it. Ruth's eyes moved to her. Understanding something incorrectly does not change ownership. Marcus shifted in his chair. His face had gone tight in a way that told me he was doing math very quickly, and not liking the numbers he found. Ruth removed another document. This is the deed for the land. The yard sits on land titled solely to Miriam Caldwell. Recorded with the county in 1991. Public record. Marion made a small sound. Thomas never said that. I looked at her. He didn't have to. It was written down. That was the thing they could not understand. They had spent years mistaking silence for absence. Because I was not loud, they believed I was not there. Because I did not demand credit, they believed I had none. Because Thomas was the one customers shook hands with, they believed I had never held the foundation beneath him. Ruth continued. The North Storage Building is owned by the company. The docks are company property. The business accounts remain under the authority of the managing member, Miriam Caldwell, according to the operating agreement. Thomas's 40% interest passes into the trust, but it does not give Nathan Caldwell control of the yard. Vanessa stood. This is ridiculous. Ruth did not look up from the document. Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell. Vanessa stayed standing. I said this is ridiculous. Nathan worked there his entire adult life. That yard is his father's legacy. Ruth finally looked at her. And Miriam Caldwell's property. Vanessa's face twisted. For a moment all the softness left her. The careful voice, the polished grief, the navy dress, the little public smile she had worn all week were gone. What remained was fear. And fear can look very much like anger when a person has built her life around never feeling helpless again. She pointed at me. She manipulated him. Nathan looked up. Vanessa. But she was past listening. She kept everything in her name. She made sure no one else knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. I stood then. Not quickly. I had no need to move quickly. I placed Thomas's maple box on the chair behind me and rested my hand on the back of it. Yes, I said. I knew exactly what I was doing. The room turned toward me. I looked at Vanessa first. I knew what I was doing when I used my savings to help start that yard. I knew what I was doing when I co-signed the first loan because Thomas's credit was damaged from a life he had before me. I knew what I was doing when I sat through bank meetings, tax audits, insurance disputes, payroll shortages, supplier threats, and winters when the harbor froze and the work slowed almost to nothing. I looked at Nathan. I knew what I was doing when I made sure your father could build boats instead of reading contracts he hated. I knew what I was doing when I made sure you had a job there, even after you broke 2 expensive pieces of equipment in one summer, because you were too proud to ask how they worked. His face flushed. I did not enjoy saying that. But some truths have to stand in daylight at least once. Then I looked back at Vanessa. And I knew what I was doing when I did not sign your paper last night. Marcus spoke for the first time in a while. What paper? That was interesting. Vanessa's head turned toward him. Ruth's assistant, who had been silent near the door, made a note. I looked at Marcus. She came to my house last night and asked me to sign temporary authority over the business accounts to Nathan. Marcus looked at Vanessa. You said she was considering it. Vanessa said. She was confused. I almost smiled. Ruth did not. Mrs. Caldwell, Ruth said, and this time everyone knew she meant Vanessa. Did you present Miriam Caldwell with a document transferring authority over business accounts after being informed that a formal reading would take place today? Vanessa sat down slowly. I was trying to keep the business stable. June Mallory, our bookkeeper, spoke from the side of the room. Payroll was stable. The accounts were stable. There was no business reason for that paper. Ruth turned toward June. Ms. Mallory, please tell the room what Nathan Caldwell requested from the office last week. June swallowed. Nathan closed his eyes. Vanessa whispered something under her breath. June said, Nathan asked for equipment valuations, account balances, and insurance schedules. He told me he would need them because he was taking over. He asked which assets could be used as collateral. Ruth asked, collateral for what? June looked at Marcus. A $72,000 loan connected to Bayline Developments. The room changed again. That kind of silence is different from shock. Shock is sharp. This was heavier. It was the silence of people realizing the story they had been told was missing an entire chapter. Marcus stood. That has nothing to do with this estate. Ruth looked at him. Then you should be relieved to know the yard has nothing to do with your loan. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. I turned to Nathan. You signed it. He could not look at me. Nathan. His voice was barely there. Yes. And Bridget dash. I stopped myself. That was the old story from someone else's life, not mine. I corrected myself. And Vanessa? He nodded. The debt was real. The urgency was real. The performance of concern had been built around a clock. Vanessa had not been trying to protect Lily and Graham's future in some gentle, careful way. She had been trying to put her hands on a business that could rescue her brother, save her own signature, and keep Nathan from admitting how foolish he had been. I looked at her then and for the first time I felt something close to pity. Not forgiveness. Pity. A person can be terrified and still be wrong. Ruth picked up the blue envelope. Thomas anticipated that there may be pressure placed on Miriam after his death. He left a letter with specific instructions that it be read aloud if any attempt was made to override the September estate plan or interfere with business control. Vanessa whispered, "No." Ruth opened the envelope with the silver letter knife. The paper inside was thick, pale blue and folded once. Thomas's handwriting covered the page in block letters. He wrote like a man measuring twice before he cut. Ruth began. "If this is being read, then I was right to worry. Miriam, I am sorry. I should have corrected people sooner. I should have told every man who called at Tom's yard that they were standing on your work. I liked hearing my name. That is the honest truth, and I regret what that cost you." My hands tightened around the back of the chair. Ruth continued, "Nathan, I love you. I have loved you from the day you were born, but love does not make you ready. You assumed the yard was yours because I let you assume it. That is my fault. What happens after this is yours." Nathan covered his mouth with one hand. Vanessa stared at the table. To Vanessa, Ruth read, "I know you think fear is the same thing as planning. It is not. You have two good children. Do not teach them to grab what was never offered." Vanessa flinched. Ruth turned the page. "I signed the November paper because I was tired, medicated, and wanted the room to quiet down. That is all. I did not understand it as a will. I did not choose it as my last word. My last word is this one signed in daylight with Ruth Bell, while I still knew exactly who I was and exactly who Miriam has always been." I closed my eyes. For a moment I was back in the truck with him, rain on the windshield, his hand covering mine. Ruth read the final lines more slowly. "The yard was never mine to give away. The sign by the office tells the truth. Before tea. She was there first in the paperwork because she was there first in the courage. If any of you want to honor me, stop asking my wife to disappear so you can call yourselves family." Ruth lowered the letter. Nobody moved. Then Nathan began to cry. Quietly at first, then with his face in both hands. Vanessa reached for him, but he pulled away. That was the first time I had seen him refuse her touch. It did not heal anything. It did not undo what he had done. But it was a beginning, and beginnings are often smaller than we want them to be. Marian stood up so abruptly her chair bumped the wall. "This is shameful." I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "It is." She had no answer for that. Because for once, the shame had been placed where it belonged. Marcus tried to leave before Ruth finished, but Ruth stopped him. "Mr. Vale, you will want to hear this as well. Any attempt to present Caldwell Marine Yard as collateral without written authority from Miriam Caldwell may create additional legal exposure. I suggest you consult your own attorney before making another phone call about this business." He looked at me then. He truly looked at me. Not like an old woman. Not like Nathan's stepmother. Not like the quiet person in the kitchen. He looked at me like someone whose name was on the documents he should have read. I said, "Bayline's loan is not my responsibility." He said, "You would let family lose everything?" I answered him carefully. "No, Marcus. I am refusing to lose everything because family borrowed against what they did not own." That sentence ended the meeting in every way that mattered. Ruth explained the rest. The November document would not be used. The September will control Thomas's estate. His 40% went into the trust. I remained majority owner and managing member of Caldwell Marine Yard. The house entered the trust for my lifetime use, with future provisions for the grandchildren once they were grown. Nathan could continue working at the yard only if I chose to keep him employed. And any transfer of business authority required my signature. My signature. The one Vanessa had tried to collect in my kitchen. The one no one had cared about for years until it became the locked door between them and what they wanted. When the meeting ended, people left in pieces. Marcus went first. Then Marianne, stiff with anger. The cousins avoided my eyes. June touched my shoulder on the way out and said, "Thomas would be proud." I said, "He should have told people sooner." She nodded. "Yes. But he told them now." Nathan stayed seated. Vanessa stood beside him, whispering quickly. He finally looked up at her and said, "Stop." One word. Small but real. She froze. Then he turned to me. "Mom." I had waited years to hear that word from him with no performance behind it. But I did not move toward him. Grief makes people honest for a moment. Consequences decide whether that honesty survives. He said. I didn't know. I believed part of that. Only part. You didn't ask. His eyes filled again. I thought Dad. You thought what everyone thought because it benefited you not to question it. That hurt him. I saw it. I let it. Some pain is not cruelty. Some pain is information arriving late. Vanessa said. Miriam, please. We need to think about the children. I looked at her. I have been thinking about the children. That is why Thomas made a trust they cannot spend. Her face hardened again, but she had lost the room and she knew it. I picked up the maple box. Thomas's coat felt heavy over my arm. Then I walked out of Ruth Bell's office and down the stairs to Harbor Street. Outside, the air smelled like salt and cold rain. The town looked exactly the same. That is the strange thing about moments that change your life. The world does not always bother to change its lighting. A gull screamed over the pharmacy roof. A man crossed the street carrying a bag of nails. Somewhere down by the harbor, one of our yard saws started up, sharp and familiar. For the first time since Thomas died, that sound did not break me. It steadied me. The aftermath took months, not days. People like to imagine a single room can end a story cleanly. But real life is messier than that. Vanessa hired an attorney from Portland. He reviewed the documents and advised her not to challenge them. I know that because Ruth received a short letter 2 weeks later confirming they would not pursue the November paper. Bayline Developments collapsed before spring. Marcus sold 2 trucks and a storage lot to cover part of what he owed. I did not help him. I did not explain myself to people who thought I should. Nathan remained at the yard, but not as heir. As an employee, I made him reapply for his position in writing. He handed me a 2-page letter that began, Dear Mrs. Caldwell, and I will admit that seeing those words from the boy I raised nearly broke something open in me. But I signed nothing until he had sat across from me and read the new employment agreement line by line. No assumptions. No shortcuts. No family promises replacing paper. He started at the same wage he had before. No promotion. No ownership. No keys to the business accounts. For the first month he barely spoke. Then one Friday afternoon, he came into my office with an invoice and said, This supplier overcharged us on freight. I looked at the invoice. He was right. It was a small error. Only $320. But he had found it because he read the paper. I corrected the invoice and said, Good catch. He looked almost embarrassed. Dad never taught me that part. No, I said. He didn't. Then I added, But I can. That is as close as we have come to forgiveness. Maybe there will be more. Maybe there will not. I am too old to promise endings on behalf of other people. Vanessa brings the children on Sundays now. She stays in the car most weeks. Lily runs up the porch steps and asks if she can help me make biscuits. Graham goes straight to Thomas's old cap hanging by the door and puts it on backward, the way Thomas hated and secretly loved. I do not speak badly about their mother. Children do not need adult wars handed to them as inheritance. But I did change my own papers again. That part matters. The trust is clear. The yard will not be sold to cover anyone's fear. The grandchildren will be provided for in ways that cannot be borrowed against, rushed, or signed away at a kitchen table. Caldwell Marine Yard still opens at 6:30 every morning. The bronze sign beside the office door is still green at the edges from salt air. M. and T. Caldwell. Founded 1986. People read it now. Sometimes they even ask what the M stands for. I tell them, Miriam. Then I watch them do the small mental work of rearranging a story they thought they already knew. That is enough for me. Thomas was not a perfect man. I will not make him one just because he is gone. He let people overlook me because it was convenient, because it made business smoother, because he liked being the man everyone credited with the miracle. But at the end, when it mattered most, he told the truth in the only language no one in that room could argue with. Dates. Signatures. Ownership records. A letter written in daylight. Vanessa told me they already knew what had to happen with the yard. In a way, she was right. Something did have to happen. The truth had to be read aloud. My son had to learn that inheritance is not the same thing as entitlement. My daughter-in-law had to learn that fear does not make theft righteous. And I had to learn that patience is not the same thing as surrender. Sometimes patience is only the sound of a woman waiting until the room is finally quiet enough for the paper to speak. My name is Miriam Caldwell. I am 68 years old. And for 38 years, everyone in Port Mason called it Tom's Yard. They can call it what they want. The deed knows my name.